Hey guys, so this is a continuation of chapter 14, the Civil War we've been talking about. So women play a significant role in the Civil War. This is both women in the South and in the North. Over 200,000 volunteer and sanitary commissions. They help with the wounded. They help displaced African Americans, displaced slaves, to try to give them some form of support so they could have some form of normality in their lives. Many women also became wage workers. They worked as government clerks. They took over teaching jobs in schools, worked in offices, textile industries, among others, including making rifles. Some women went as far as being spies, others were scouts, and even few, about 400 of them, disguised themselves as men to fight in the war as soldiers. Clara Barton, she establishes the American Red Cross and it becomes an influential society, of course, which we still have today. It started in the Civil War. So we'll notice how women's role in society since the women's rights movement began is actually improving, and war gives them an opportunity to show their skills and their productivity. Thus far, we've talked about two major battles. The first battle was the Battle of Bull Run, and then we moved forward into the Battle of Antietam. We're going to be looking at Gettysburg right now. So by this point, General Ulysses S. Grant is put in charge of all Union forces. Lincoln had tired out of trying to find productive generals that were going to be successful in battle. He eventually finds his best general in Ulysses S. Grant. So this is the battle at Gettysburg. Grant wanted to split the Confederates in two, and he had actually already done that by the time Gettysburg comes around. He cut off Louisiana, that's what LA stands for, Arkansas, and Texas. He now looked forward to Gettysburg. Lee kept looking for a victory in northern soil, and he believed that Gettysburg would give him that victory. So the two armies met on July 1st, 1863 in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. They actually met by chance. The battle begins on July 1st, 1863. The first day, Lee is successful in driving out Union forces out of the town of Gettysburg. So the Union forces are forced to retreat to a little hill, but that hill actually becomes their lifeline. There, they're able to gain ground. They have upper hand. In addition to that, they get reinforcement. General Meade is in charge in this battle for the Union. Keep in mind, Lee is for the Confederate. By the time the second day comes around of the battle, the Union has 90,000 troops and the Confederates have 75,000 troops. So the Union is more prepared now. They have a better position and they have more troops. And they do engage in conflict during the second day of the battle. And it looks like the second day is starting to shift in favor of the Union. On July 3rd, Lee wanted to break the stronghold of the Union. So Lee asked General George Pickett to attack the center of the Union lines to take the Union's positions, which would now give the Confederates a huge advantage. Unfortunately for Pickett, the charge went totally bad. Over 14,000 Confederate soldiers died in an attempt to take the hilltop. And by the end of that third day, it was clearly evident that the Confederates were going to lose not only this particular battle, but most likely the war. General Lee lost this battle, but again, he was able to escape. So unfortunately, while Grant was in charge of Union forces and he was the one telling Meade what to do, Meade was the one that was actually doing the fighting, and like McClellan, he is unable to capture Lee, so the battle drags on for another year and a half. At the end of the Battle of Gettysburg, this says we have 28,000 Confederate and 23,000 Union casualties. We mentioned that Antietam was the bloodiest day in American history. Gettysburg is the bloodiest battle in American history. Over 51,000 casualties. This kind of gives you an idea of where we're located. So down here is Virginia, that's Washington, D.C. Richmond's right around here. Lee felt comfortable after having a decisive victory at Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville. he actually wanted again to take Washington, D.C. As he is marching north, Union forces are in between him and the capital, preventing Lee from attacking. Eventually, they go from Virginia into Maryland, and then they finally meet at Gettysburg. And again, that's the Union general, General Meade, that confronts Lee at the battle. And even though the Union wins, Lee escapes to yet live another day. Amidst all this, we do have the presidential elections of 1864. The Republicans, these are both in the North, choose Abraham Lincoln to continue for re-election. Lincoln wanted unconditional surrender by the Confederates, and he also called for an amendment to end slavery once and for all. Now, there were some people in the border states that didn't necessarily agree with his full agenda, so to try to get their appeal, the Republicans picked Andrew Jackson as vice president to appeal to border states and some Democrats. The Northern Democrats, they elect George Meade, the guy that just lost the opportunity to capture Lee and end the war, as their running mate, and they are split into two. They're the War Democrats, who want a complete surrender of the Confederate. And then there's the Peaceful Democrats, also known as the Copperheads. They want all fighting to stop immediately. They want peace terms, and to a certain extent, they kind of support secession. So because of this, it seems like the Democrats are on the losing ground. But Lincoln still needed to win the election, and he does so. You see the results here. Everything in red are all the states that voted for Lincoln. The blue ones, border states of Kentucky and Delaware, along with New Jersey, voted for McClellan. But Lincoln wins re-election, and he continues to be president in 1864. Black is the Confederates, and they had no votes there. So here is one of the major reasons why actually Lincoln wins re-election. We're going to shift now a little bit to the down to the south. Gettysburg was up here in Pennsylvania. Now we're coming down south, and we are being introduced to William Sherman. William Sherman, we're going to take the battle from here. This is known as Sherman's March. On September 2nd, 1864, 2 months before the presidential election, Sherman took Atlanta and presented it to Lincoln as a gift. By doing so, Lincoln was able to win re-election, because people realized that the war is coming to an end, and that Lincoln, since the war started under his term, the war should end under his term. But this is just the beginning of Sherman's march to the sea. William Sherman is a no-nonsense general. He wants to bring the fear of war to the Southerners. So from Atlanta, he marches down to Savannah. This is known as Sherman's March to the Sea. This is a 300 journey, and along the way he leaves a path of 60 miles of total destruction in what becomes known as total war. He destroyed farms, factory, railroad lines. He defeated Confederate soldiers. He defeated their will to fight. He just annihilated everything. By the time he reaches Savannah on December 22nd, 1864, Savannah, Georgia, fell without a fight. And again, Sherman presents Savannah, Georgia to Lincoln as his Christmas gift. Sherman is not done. He now moves forward. Remember, South Carolina was the first state to succeed. They are the aggressors. They were the perpetrators. So Sherman continues moving up north, and again he burns everything. He burns churches, government buildings, business districts, entire neighborhoods. He wants the South to know that secession is foolish, and that the South is to blame for all the destruction that the Civil War had caused up until that point. So Sherman takes total war to the South and is a very, very destructive general. But again, it gives Union the victory that they need. So finally, this is the road to victory. Both sides, but after fighting for 4 years, grew tired of war. Yeomen were complaining that slave masters wanted to keep their power, and there was no reason for the yeomen to continue to fight and die. By 1865, over 100,000 yeomen had actually deserted the Confederate Army and had returned to their fields. So the Confederate Army was losing men to fight. Ironically, it's a few months before the Civil War ends that the Confederates give slaves the right to enlist in the war. But the war ends too soon to see if any slaves actually were willing to fight for the Confederate, which I would assume probably not. In the early 1865, Grant met Lee's forces, and he forced Lee to abandon Richmond, Virginia, which was the capital of the Confederates. A few days later, on April 9, 1865, Lee officially surrendered to Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse, bringing the Civil War to an end. The Northern Army was thus successful in not only preserving the Union, but destroying slavery. At the end of the war, over 700,000 people lie dead after 4 years of fighting. And while the surrender of Appomattox Courthouse brings the war to an end, that also brings Reconstruction to the beginning. Reconstruction is the path to rebuild not only the South, which lays in ruins, but also relationship between the North and the South. And that is going to take nearly 100 years to rebuild. So the next phase of our study in history is known as the era of Reconstruction.